I simply cannot find her.
Maria?
She's missing from the Abbey again.
Perhaps we should have put a cowbell around her neck.
I have looked everywhere, in all of the usual places.
Considering that it's Maria, I suggest you look in someplace unusual.
In 1964, during the filming of The Sound of Music, a single sound brought chaos to the set and nearly destroyed one of the film's most iconic scenes. It wasn't dramatic or tragic. It was funny, too funny. So funny that no one could stay in character. Take after take was ruined. The studio spent thousands trying to fix it, then chose to bury the story completely. For decades, it stayed hidden, until Julie Andrews finally told the truth on live television. What really happened in that gazebo? And why did Christopher Plummer, who hated the film, agree to keep quiet? Europe falls in love with the story. It all started quietly in the mid-1950s. Back in 1956, a German producer named Wolfgang Liebeniner released two films based on Maria von Trapp's memoir, The Story of the Trapp Family Singers. The first was Die Trapp Family, and it was followed by a sequel a year later. They were low-budget, sentimental, and very European in tone, but they struck a chord. In post-war West Germany, people were craving stories that were heartwarming and full of hope. These two films delivered just that. Both films turned into box office gold. In fact, they were the biggest commercial film success in West Germany at the time. The story's charm didn't stop there, it spread like wildfire through Europe and even found an audience in South America. People across different languages and cultures connected with the image of a musical Austrian family standing up to the Nazis and choosing love over fear. But when the films were shown to American studios, the reaction was not great. To put it nicely, Hollywood thought the movies looked like a high school play, too sentimental, too corny, too foreign. Nobody was lining up to bring the Von Trapps to the US screen. That is, until a man named Vincent J. Donahue stepped in. Donahue was no ordinary director, he had just won a Tony Award and had a sharp eye for stories that could move people. Paramount sent him to scout out new projects, and he happened to screen the German Trapp family movies. At first, he had the same reaction everyone else did, clumsy and awkward. But then something unexpected happened. Beneath the low-budget production and outdated style, he saw something real. The story had soul. It had heart. And Donahue said something no one had dared to say before: you can't make this a film. You have to turn it into a Broadway musical, for Mary Martin. That one sentence flipped the switch, and triggered a chain reaction that would lead to one of the biggest musicals in history. But none of it would have happened if Maria von Trapp hadn't made a very unusual, and some might say terrible, business decision years earlier. The $9,000 deal. Maria von Trapp was no Hollywood insider. She had no agent, no lawyers looking out for her. She was just trying to support her family. So, when German filmmakers came knocking in the early 1950s asking to buy her life story, she said yes, for a one-time payment of just $9,000. Now, that might sound small, and it was. Even in 1950s money, it wasn't much. Adjusted for today, it's about $104,000. Not bad for a quick deal, but a tiny fraction of what was coming down the line. And to make things worse, Maria had unknowingly signed away more than she realized. Hollywood came calling later, offering to buy the title of her book, hoping to skip the rights issues and just adapt a story inspired by it. But Maria stood her ground. She insisted that if her family's story was going to be told, it had to be told truthfully, and in full. No cherry-picking. By the late 1950s, Mary Martin, the biggest Broadway star of the era, and her husband Richard Halliday were determined to bring the Von Trapp story to the stage. But there was just one problem: no one knew where Maria was. As it turned out, Maria von Trapp was deep in the jungles of Papua New Guinea, doing missionary work with Father Franz Wasner, the family's longtime musical director. They had no phones, no internet, just handwritten letters. And those letters? Maria didn't even open them. Every time they arrived at a new mission post, a pile of mail would be waiting, often with letters from some couple in America trying to talk to her about Broadway. She tore them up. Literally. Maria wasn't interested in showbiz. She was focused on serving people in remote villages, running clinics, teaching music, and living simply. Broadway was the last thing on her mind. But then something unexpected happened. When Maria and Father Wasner finally returned to the U.S. by ship, they docked in San Francisco. And waiting for them at the pier was none other than Richard Halliday. He handed Maria 2 tickets to see his wife perform in Annie Get Your Gun. Maria agreed to go, probably just to be polite. But what she saw on that stage blew her away. Mary Martin was charming, powerful, and magnetic. Maria was moved, but still had bad news to deliver. She explained she had already sold the film rights to the Germans years ago. That door was technically closed. Still, she gave the couple a surprising green light. "You're welcome to give it your best shot," she told them. That one chance, one casual okay from Maria, would kick off one of Broadway's biggest legends. The gamble that paid off when producers first got serious about turning Maria von Trapp's life into a stage musical. They had a very different plan. The idea was to mix traditional Austrian folk songs, like the real tunes the Trapp family sang in concerts, with just a few new songs to help tie the story together. Think a little Broadway flavor sprinkled over old European charm. But when they approached Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein to write just 1 or 2 songs, the legendary duo didn't hold back. Rodgers and Hammerstein basically said, "Thanks, but no thanks, either we write the whole thing, or we're out." They didn't want their work clashing with old Austrian ballads. It was all or nothing. And that moment changed everything. The producers hit pause. Rodgers and Hammerstein still had to finish Flower Drum Song, so the new project was shelved temporarily. But when they finally returned to the Von Trapp story, they rewrote the entire concept from scratch, with all original songs. And not just any songs. We're talking about classics like My Favorite Things, Do-Re-Mi, Edelweiss, and Climb Every Mountain. Songs that the world still sings today. Then came opening night, November 16, 1959. The curtain rose at the Luntfontein Theater on Broadway with Mary Martin as Maria and Theodore Bikel as Captain Von Trapp. The production cost $400,000 to stage, a hefty budget back then. But the buzz was electric. Ticket sales exploded, eventually raking in over $232 million in advanced bookings alone. Let that sink in, over $232 million. Before most people had even seen the show. Mary Martin barely took a day off, she only missed 1 performance in the entire run. The show ran for 1,443 performances, nearly 4 years, before closing in June 1963. But by the summer of 1960, something else started heating up. A bidding war for the movie rights. Studios knew this wasn't just a hit, it was a phenomenon. 20th century. The Sound of Music, people thought they were crazy. But the contract had one sneaky little clause: if the film made more than $12.5 million, Rodgers and Hammerstein's estate would get 10% of the profits. Co-writer Howard Lindsay literally laughed at it. He didn't think the movie would get anywhere near that number. He couldn't have been more wrong. And now we get to one of the biggest what-ifs in Hollywood casting history. Julie Andrews' Revenge, Hollywood's big mistake. By the early 1960s, Julie Andrews had already conquered the stage. She was beloved for her role as Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady on Broadway. Her voice was stunning, her charm undeniable. But when it came time to turn My Fair Lady into a film, Hollywood turned its back on her. The studio head said she wasn't camera ready. In other words, they thought she wasn't glamorous enough for the big screen. So instead of casting the woman who made the role famous, they chose Audrey Hepburn, a move that stunned Broadway fans. Audrey was elegant, sure, but she couldn't sing like Julie. In fact, most of her songs in the film had to be dubbed. Julie was devastated. She had carried My Fair Lady for years, only to be passed over at the biggest moment. It was the kind of snub that could have ended a career. But fate had other plans. Around that same time, director Robert Wise was looking for someone to play Maria von Trapp in The Sound of Music. He wasn't convinced Julie was the right fit, until someone at Disney showed him an early cut of Mary Poppins. The film wasn't even finished yet. But just a few minutes in, Wise turned to the screenwriter and said, "Let's sign her, before anyone else does." Julie was offered the role of Maria for a flat fee of $225,000. In today's money, that's about $2.28 million. It was a decent paycheck for a rising star, but here's the catch: there were no royalties, no bonuses, and no box office cut. Once she cashed that check, that was it. Meanwhile, Mary Martin, who had played Maria on stage, had negotiated a very different deal. She earned more than $8 million from her share of the Broadway profits. Fox didn't think Andrews was a big enough star to deserve a back-end deal. That decision would come back to haunt them. Because Mary Poppins turned out to be a smash hit. Julie Andrews not only proved the studio wrong, she won an Oscar for Best Actress. And when she accepted the award, she did something cheeky. She thanked Jack Warner, the very man who had rejected her for My Fair Lady. It was a sweet, subtle form of revenge, and the audience loved it. Still, The Sound of Music would become her most iconic role. And even though the film would go on to earn hundreds of millions worldwide, Julie never saw a single dollar beyond that original flat fee. And she wasn't the only one Fox tried to shortchange. The role no one wanted while Julie Andrews was already charming everyone behind the scenes, casting her on-screen partner was turning into a serious headache. The role of Captain George Von Trapp should have been a dream gig. He was the handsome, brooding widower who slowly falls in love with Maria. But here's the thing, no major actor wanted to play him. Robert Wise, the director, tried everyone. He considered Sean Connery, who had just shaken the world as James Bond. He also reached out to Richard Burton, known for his intense performances, and his rocky relationship with